by Queen Victoria, and it's being web streamed. I don't think we have any members of the public expecting to speak, but if so, we've got two things where we've got deputations. Item 4 on the private rented sector with Cal and Councillor Cal Corkery, and item 14 social value of Councillor Jeanette Smith. And I was going to take those two first, if that's all right. The private rented sector bit is the first thing anyway, but then do item 14, the social value bit, straight after that, if that's okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It doesn't look to me as if we have any apologies for absence. Any declarations of interest? Peter, just for completeness, in terms of the private rented one, if people are either live in private rented accommodation or are landlords, do they need to declare an interest?
No, I've done that.
So could you put your thing on so your voice is heard, Clay?
You should have all received an email from me on the issue of pecuniary interest and personal interest and prejudicial personal interest. I've taken a different view from the view I took at full council, given the nature of the report before the Cabinet today.
Okay.
So I don't think any of you are excluded from effective governance today.
Okay. And for people who might be watching, should we quickly run around the room to make sure everybody introduces themselves so people know who they are? So I'm Gerald Thun-Jackson, I'm chair of this meeting and I'm leader of the council.
Rob Wood, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Matthew Williamson, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care.
Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Education.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing.
Ian Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Councillor Lee Hunt, Cabinet Member for Community Safety.
Tom Wood, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Cal Corkery, Labour Spokesperson for Housing.
Councillor Jeanette Smith, PPP Member for Baffins North, Milton and South Copner.
Claire Hardwick, Head of Private Sector Housing.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director Housing.
Kay Nash from Strategy Unit.
James Sill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
David Williams, Chief Executive.
Edward Skinner, Regulatory Services.
Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
Joanne Maud-Smith, Democratic Services.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Deputy Leader of the Council, Cabinet Member for Culture and City Development.
Okay, folks. Item 3 then is minutes of the last meeting on the 4th of February. Colleagues, are you happy with those minutes?
Yes. Yeah, agreed.
Okay, let's move on to the draft private rental sector strategy. So Claire, hello, welcome. Do you want to introduce this?
Thank you very much. So the purpose of the report is to present the draft private rental sector strategy following the agreed recommendations from the Housing Cabinet decision meeting in October 2019. So as well as using local and national data already available to us, we conducted a survey of tenants and landlords in the city. The survey went live on the 23rd of December 2019 and closed on the 20th of January this year. We had 849 responses, 324 of which were from landlords and 525 from tenants. The survey results have been used to shape the draft strategy. This has given us an insight into what is important to both landlords and tenant groups. It's also helped us to define what makes a good landlord and tenant, and has led to 6 themes which make a well-functioning private rental sector. They are affordability, safety, security of tenure, ease to enter and leave the sector, ability to work well with other tenures and as part of the community, and regulation. We've also highlighted 2 strategic aims, which are to achieve an active and well-functioning private rental sector which works fairly for all, and for the private rental sector to be seen as a desirable type of tenure which meets the needs of those who use it, with support being focused on those who need it most. We've also highlighted 9 strategic aims with a number of actions identified to meet the objectives. So the focus has been on working with good landlords and tenants and to take action to deal with bad ones. This sets out the direction of travel for the City Council and will help to improve the private rental sector to work better for all. The actions have been categorised into 2 categories, those that can be implemented without delay, which include actions such as to expand the current website offering, to provide more information on how to be a good landlord or how to be a good tenant, and how to access services and more advice where necessary, to help to develop the current HMO governance board into a multi-agency partnership group which will oversee this strategy and which will review the stakeholders to ensure that all the voices that are necessary are represented, and to review the current enforcement policy to make them more transparent. There are a number of other actions, but I won't go into all of them in detail here. There are also another category of actions which would require more resources or permissions before they can be implemented. They include actions such as investigating the creation of a mediation service between landlords and tenants to help improve security of tenure, to investigate and consult on reintroducing additional licensing for HMOs to help in the better management of them and to understand how they interact with the local community, and a number of other actions which I won't go into in more detail here. So because of the citywide nature of the strategy, it's important that a full and meaningful consultation takes place to ensure that it's successfully delivered. We're aiming for a consultation to commence before the end of March of this year to run for a 3-month period on the draft strategy. And the recommendations of the report are that the Cabinet approve the draft strategy, that we immediately begin to implement some of the actions from the strategy in the category that allows us to implement them without further permissions, and to consult on the draft strategy.
Thank you, Claire. Cal,
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Gerald. Let me know if you're taking a picture and I'll wave this time. So the reason I wanted to come and speak on this is obviously this is something that of particular interest to me and something that we've been doing quite a bit of campaigning around. Thought might be useful just to kind of introduce by talking about some of that background. So issues in the private rented sector, particularly from tenants that are experiencing kind of poor quality housing, having very negative experiences of their living conditions and experience of rogue landlords and poor treatment is something that keeps coming up. The current situation, I believe, is one where landlords have significant power and control over people's lives and tenants have very little. Before being elected, I engaged with Labour councillors and kind of Labour campaigning groups around the country to find out what they were doing in their own particular areas to try and help redress that imbalance of power. One policy that had been successful elsewhere was the use of landlord licensing powers. That's both additional licensing of small HMOs and selective licensing of all privately rented properties in specific areas. It seemed to me this was a power that the council here in Portsmouth had, but was not using, and one that could start to improve the lives of private renters and people living in communities with high densities of privately rented properties. So we took up the issue and started campaigning on it. We engaged with hundreds of residents, both online and out on the doorstep, and found overwhelming support for the council using its powers to extend landlord licensing. One of the first acts I took after being elected was to submit a motion to full council, looking to commit the local authority to implement additional licensing of smaller HMOs and selective licensing of all privately rented homes in specific areas. As people will remember, the first meeting where it was due to be discussed, councillors that remained in the room voted not to hear that, and that was obviously the majority of the Tory councillors, but also 1 or 2 Lib Dems failed to vote for the motion to be heard. So it was brought back to a further meeting where we were then able to have that discussion. The motion was amended, I believe watered down down to take out the firm commitments to landlord licensing and instead propose a general review of the private rented sector, which is the report that we have before us today. My concern at that time was that this was kicking the can down the road, being seen to do something without actually doing anything, and that is really the theme of what I wanted to say today. So the report provides an overview of the draft strategy and outlines the proposed objectives and actions. In terms of the objectives, I just wanted to run through some of those. So one of the first ones that's proposed is talk about increasing the level of landlord accreditation, and there's kind of some sentiment around consumer choice, allowing tenants to have the choice to look at how landlords are rated and then go with the one they feel best suits their needs. Now, for some tenants, that may well suit their circumstances and they may have an ability to choose, but actually the people on the lowest incomes and the most vulnerable renters have no choice often in their living environment. It's a case of looking around for the one landlords that may take housing benefit or universal credit, or find the one letting agent that's able to deal with them. So choice for them is not something that exists. So I can't see how having an optional accreditation scheme, which the good landlords will sign up for, and plenty of them probably already are, but actually excludes the bad landlords because it is optional, is particularly going to help people in those circumstances. There's reference to, in the objectives, more tenants can afford a sustainable rents level. I'm not entirely sure what that means and what the kind of actions are around that, so I'd be interested to hear out in the debate if that can be discussed a little bit more. Also talks about tenants and landlords will be considered when significant decision making within the city occurs. Again, it's a nice sentiment, but what is the kind of rationale behind it? How is that going to be implemented in practice? I would hope that tenants are already one of the groups that are considered when significant decisions are being made about their lives. It also goes on to talk about, as a quote, strong regulators will use all of their powers, working with partner agencies and stakeholders to tackle and remove criminal and antisocial behaviour. Not quite sure about the word in there. It sounds to me as if that is leaning towards looking at issues with tenants as opposed to landlords. I appreciate there can be criminal landlords, but the way in which it is worded and phrased, I think, is not entirely clear. I would also be keen to know how the enforcement against landlords is proposed to be monitored and reported. I'm not entirely sure if that happens at the moment. I've certainly not attended any meetings where we've talked about the level of action that is being taken against landlords, and whether that's going up or down, so that that's in the public domain and can be monitored and kind of actioned appropriately. Moving on to the action plan, there's talk of developing the HMO governance board, or kind of improving or coming up with some kind of new body, which, as someone who sits the HMO governance board, is a very welcome development. My personal experience of those meetings is that we talk a lot. I'm not entirely sure what has come out of there in terms of any identifiable actions. Definitely nothing's happened in terms of policy development. We talk a lot about statistics. We go through in real kind of minute detail the number of complaints that have been made and who about and all that sort of thing. But again, I think it has unfortunately become a little bit of a talking shop. So development and improvement on that is very much welcomed. There's also talk in the initial action plan about, so this quote, ensure that officers responsible for regulating the private renting sector are trained to a professional standard and capable of meeting the needs of this strategy. I would hope that officers active within that area are already trained to an appropriate level, so I'd be slightly concerned if they're not. If they already are, then it's not really much of an action plan if it's just continuation of current practice. In total, I think the initial action plan seems to me general things that we should be doing anyway, and not really anything substantive that's going to make a significant difference to change the current state of the private rented sector. There is a further section that talks about actions which require further work, and the first one I picked out of that.
Your 6 minutes is up.
Okay, allow me to just finish this and I'll conclude. I haven't got too much left. So it talks about working with tenancy groups. So my query would be, which tenancy groups are we talking about? I don't think there are really many tenancy groups in existence at the moment, so are we proposing some kind of community development work to support those to be developed? And it all talks about using workshops on how to be a good tenant. Again, for me, the focus there is on the tenant as opposed to the landlord, which I don't think is the direction we should be going in. Skipping on, it talks about loans for good accredited landlords to improve the quality of their property. Great. What about the bad landlords? What about the rogue landlords? That's where the focus of this should be. Just coming on to the most important bit, it talks about consulting and reintroducing additional licensing of HMOs reintroducing additional licensing of HMOs to smaller properties. Appreciate a little bit of clarity about what we're talking about here, because obviously this is in the actions which require further work. So are we saying in future we are going to potentially look at consulting on reintroducing that scheme, or are we going to start the consultation now? And that consultation, is this an informal consultation to decide whether that's something we want to pursue, or is it formal consultation, as in the initial start of the process of getting the ball rolling? There's no mention anywhere in the report that I can see, and happy to be corrected on this, of selective licensing. So that is licensing that the council has within its powers to talk about all privately rented sector properties, and that can be across the city or in specific areas where the need has been identified. Has that been considered and ruled out? If so, I'd be interested to know why. If it hasn't been considered, why not? Because that is a crucial part of the powers available to the local authority. The last point I want to make before I conclude is around energy, and so green standards within private rented sector. Again, I haven't seen any mention of it within the report. I think that is an opportunity there, and again, do correct me if I have missed it, but I think there should be an opportunity within this report to talk about how we can drive up green standards within the private rented sector. We know statistically that the highest density of people living in energy poverty are living in private rented sector strategy, private rented sector. There's often poor insulation and inefficient heating systems, and energy poverty obviously is directly linked to the affordability of housing if people are having to pay additional costs associated with that housing. So in conclusion, I believe that this report is kind of lacking any significant substance that is going to propose any major change to the private rented sector. It seems to me we're talking a lot about stuff that we're already doing or should already be doing, but maybe are or not. I think it's a missed opportunity to implement licensing and use that licensing scheme perhaps to look at environmental standards. And finally, I think the main point that comes out for me is that it's almost suggested that there are equivalents between the needs or the concerns of tenants and the needs and concerns of landlords. And for me, there is no equivalence. Like I said, there's a significant inequality in terms of the way in which power and wealth is distributed towards those two groups. And I'm not sure that is borne out in the report and the council's strategy.
Carol, if you've been the Lord Mayor of the council meeting after you've been on for 10 minutes, for future it might be best to time it. I would find it very useful, Claire, because this came from a discussion that you'd wanted us to look at doing selective licensing. Claire, as the private sector manager, what is your view about whether that additional licensing will be beneficial or not beneficial, and where does it sit in the report?
There are two different types of licensing, so I just want to be clear about the terminology that we use. So selective licensing is something that can be applied to all rented properties. Additional licensing is licensing that we would apply to HMOs.
Okay.
So the strategy does talk about, as one of the potential actions, exploring HMO licensing. Selective licensing hasn't been identified as an action in this strategy, in the draft strategy. And that's based on the fact that this strategy is looking at proportionate action, and selective licensing would apply to all landlords in the city, regardless of whether they would be classed as the type of landlords that need regulation further or not. That's one of the reasons that this is a draft consultation, and it would require a consultation to look at what stakeholders and the public feel about the proposals for the actions.
But Claire, when we introduced HMO licensing, we did it across all HMO landlords, whether they were good or bad. So what is the difference here?
So with HMOs, we have evidence which suggests that there are a greater impact on the local community, particularly in areas of higher concentrations. Where we're talking about selective licensing, that would be applied to all private rental sector properties throughout the city, or in designated areas, but it doesn't make any distinguishment between the types of occupation of those properties or how they're being managed or what impact they actually have on the local community.
Okay. So I would be interested at some point to have a detailed thing to say, if we're not going to go down that route, why not? Because more and more people do live in private rented accommodation, and there may be a good reason not to do it, but just because it's going to be a range of different landlords wouldn't seem to me a good reason. But anyway, but okay, that moves this on a bit. But okay, that's very helpful, Claire. Darren, this is your portfolio.
Thank you very much, Gerald. I want to respond to a couple of Cal's points before my general remarks. With regards to green standards, I suggest Cal has a look at the next report that's coming, which is the energy and water strategy, which is going to be mainly focused in the areas that have a disproportionate amount of private rented housing. That has got to be part of an essential key, and so driving green standards up in those properties, hopefully at the end of this meeting, will be an essential part of this administration. With regards to the selective licensing discussion, the evidence is simply, the evidence of the problem doesn't justify it. So the answer is it has been considered and it has been looked at. You will know, Cal, about the MHCLG review of selective licensing. You will know about the House of Commons review of selective licensing, both of which said that selective licensing on its own was not going to work. I have talked to very good Labour councils across the country. Take Blackpool, for instance, which is, I know, something that the Labour Party is very proud to promote, the work that's been done up there. And when they've looked at selective licensing in terms of dealing with their HMO problem, which essentially a load of poor quality B&Bs that actually were not very good, and then became HMOs, they said that selective licensing dealt with the worst excesses of the problem, not the root causes. Our approach is to deal with the root causes of the issue, and they are many and they are varied. I rent privately, and I know, like many of the tenants who rent privately in the city, that they feel trapped. They feel there is nowhere to go. We want to try and have an ambitious package that actually deals with all the causes. Selective licensing will not deal with the people who come here and report as homeless because they're behind with their rent. That is the second biggest cause of homelessness in the city. That will not deal with people who come here homeless because their landlord wants to buy the flat back or buy the place back. That is the biggest single cause of homelessness in this city. We want to go out and deal with the causes based on the evidence, not one answer to the problem, because there is no one answer to the problem. But there is a hierarchy. And the first is to offer support both to landlords and tenants. A sixth of the landlords in this city fell into it by accident. That's not very good. Many tenants feel trapped. They both need help and support, something which, as you know, Cal, is identified as one of the issues in the Greater Manchester review currently being conducted by Shelter and the Nationwide Foundation. One of the issues they've found is a lack of support for tenants. They've also found that tenants and landlords both see the few rogues or criminals in their midst, whether it's a tenant who's smashing the place up or a landlord who won't do any work, as running down everyone else. And we want to make sure we focus our work on that, firstly by providing support, and secondly through mitigating the problem. That is where the mediation service, which I will hope will be beefed up and I want us to lobby to become Britain's first housing court to deal with this, is important. And this is where I do agree with you, Cal. I think there is a real danger if we, with some things, that if we're not very careful, there is a power imbalance. And that's why I wanted to be backed up as a court, not purely a mediation service, to make sure that there is a proper balance between the two things. And the final thing is enforcement. The evidence is not suggesting that the issues that occurred in Newham or occur in Blackpool or occur in Southampton around antisocial behaviour, which is the driver for selective licensing, happens so much here. The evidence does exist, which is, you know, because you wrote it down when we discussed it, Cal, there is an issue with HMOs. Particularly, all the complaints are focused on shared houses, not every other type of house, Gerald. So the evidence is focused on HMOs. That's why I think it's right that we look at bringing back additional licensing for smaller HMOs, which I know is a problem in much of Steve, Susie and George Fielding's ward, and also in Rob Wood, Tom Wood and Chris Atwell's ward in St Thomas. And I've listened to people like the East St Thomas Neighbourhood Forum who've done great work over the years, as well as people in Central Southsea, to try and make sure that we can deal with those issues, if we can. Because there's a particular issue with complaints in areas of high concentration of HMOs. So this is an ambitious project. The shelter project in Greater Manchester, with £1.5 million of funding from the Nationwide Foundation, has identified 5 things that need to happen over the next 2 years. We've identified a tad more than 5. And some of it will take time, some of it will take money. But if we don't do it in an integrated way, then we will do what many other authorities have done, which is just say, here's something that looks great on a leaflet, but won't deal with the issues. And I want us to deal with the issues in a way that is ambitious for our city and ambitious for the many tenants who live privately, to try and stop them feeling trapped. So on that basis, Gerald, I think it's less than 10 minutes, but I'm happy to propose the recommendations.
Just under 5. Okay, anybody else? Cabinet? Oh, Steve.
Thank you, Leader. Claire, the case that's cited the most around selective licensing is Newham. And after we had the debate at full council, I went and did quite a lot of reading up around what was going on in Newham. Are you aware of that, and could you articulate a little bit to us why, having looked at selective licensing, you think that that's a poor example for us to use here?
I mean, I can tell you that the situation in Newham is very different to the situation here in Portsmouth. They had a very high issue with criminality of landlords. And they had the demographic of who was a renter in the city was very different as well, and there was a lot of criminality around that as well. We don't have any evidence to suggest that we have that level of problem here in Portsmouth, anywhere near that level of problem. The issues in Portsmouth, the complaints that we receive regarding rental properties, there's a clear trend towards them being lent towards HMOs rather than the general private rental sector. We see the proportion of complaints about those properties is very low, and therefore the case for selective licensing is very weak in this area compared to somewhere like Newham, where it would have been an appropriate course of action to take with the level of issues that they were experiencing.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And a follow-up, Claire, and I've raised this before. Do you see that the role of ward councillors in regularly interacting with their residents and speaking to them on the doorsteps and asking them specifically if they're in private rented accommodation, and if so, what the issues are, something that I've raised directly with you on a number of issues, and you've pointed me towards where we can actually get support for those people or address issues, and that's been as varied as issues around damp, down to there being no handrail on a steep flight of stairs, that councillors have a key role to play around that process. And would you also agree that I'm sure your knowledge of your partner arm at the council around social and affordable housing and the role played by the housing associations, my personal experience is I get far more casework about poor performance by housing associations than I do about the private rental sector in the city.
So the first point that you made about the role of councillors, absolutely I agree that that's a very important role, and I think that some of the actions from this strategy will help to strengthen that and to unify that. So I think that can only be a good thing, and definitely want that to go forward. The other point that you're making about RSLs, we're trying to push forward with tenants going through their complaints procedure for that, because all of those tenants have another route of redress which I don't think is really exploited at the moment, which is to go through the housing ombudsman, which is the correct route, and that would bring those RSLs back into line with what they should be doing.
Okay, Paul.
Sorry, just a very brief point. I'm actually meeting with the first of a number of RSLs this afternoon on exactly that point, and one of the things we'll be raising is how we can better communicate on exactly those things. So yeah, we're working on that.
Okay. Talk to Southern if they're coming, because they're rubbish. Sorry, that might be undiplomatic. They're not as good as they could be. Rob.
Just very quickly, one of the things is obviously being involved in very early stages of what became the HMO rule in planning, etc., early on, and we reached the limits of what you could do then. Part of the reason was the imbalance was we weren't being a level playing field. I welcome that. I know we're working with the East St Thomas residents who are very vocal about this. HMOs are top of their list in terms of where they can go. We've totally gone through the planning stage, and about licensing is very important. So I'm very keen that we deal with at the top of the pile first, and then look at what comes out from your strategy and your consultation, because rather to work on one front rather than several fronts in one go. So I concur with this report.
Okay, thanks for that. Cal, one small point at the beginning of your thing was around the debate at full council. I think there wasn't a debate about whether it should be heard or not. It was whether it had been proposed by somebody or seconded by somebody who wasn't allowed to, and whether the council should suspend standing orders to allow that person to be replaced when. So there wasn't a debate about whether it should be heard or not, and I'm sure you would not wish to misrepresent things. I think what I'm looking for out of here is an ambitious plan, and actually, I'm sorry, I have to agree with Cal. There is the power imbalance between tenants and landlords is very strongly in favour of landlords. It doesn't mean that some tenants don't treat properties very badly, and some tenants don't run up huge debts which they then don't pay, but the basic imbalance is very strong, and we need to be doing everything we can to make sure that we support tenants. And I have been to talk to people who have been treated absolutely shockingly by some landlords, and what we need to be doing is to protect them, support landlords to be better, and to see if we can make sure we have an integrated approach. I think, Claire, I agree with you that the big area to work on in terms of problem now is the area of HMOs, and if we had unlimited capacity we could do everything at once, but we don't. So it seems entirely sensible that the strategy says, look, let's do HMOs and see what we can do, make sure we license smaller HMOs and see if we can remove those big problems. But I hope we will not close our mind to doing additional licensing for all landlords if there is the need to do so. But I think the strategy is right to look at the big problem first and see if we can solve that big problem first. So I'm happy to propose stuff as is here. Colleagues, are you happy for this? And I think we'll look forward to regular updates on this, which I'm sure all members of the council will be interested in as well. Are you happy with that, folks? Thank you very much indeed. Can we then move, folks, on to item 14? No. No. Item 14 falls, doesn't it? Because Joe. And my understanding was the appendix had been anonymised and so could therefore.
There was an exempt appendix that you need to pass that remains exempt. There is a replacement open one though, so you do have to pass that for the one that won't be referred to in this meeting.
So we got to pass this to refer to make sure that to an appendix to which we are not going to refer. Okay.
You don't need people to
fine.
leave.
I'm sure that's logical to somebody. Colleagues, Joe's advice is that we just in terms of this one appendix B, which we're not going to refer to, that we go into closed session. Is that okay? Yes. Thank you. No, in which case, so let's go. Peter, can you give us advice on what we should or should not do? And we need to do it with your microphone on.
The basic point is, because you're not going to discuss it, because you've got a new one, an open one on white paper as opposed to orange, you don't need to go to closed session to do that.
You need to make sure that that document remains confidential, that's all I'm saying.
Peter, is that right?
Yeah, all you need to do is declare that it remains confidential, then move on to the white one and carry on as is.
So, colleagues, are you happy for this one to remain confidential, not refer to it? Move on. Lovely. Item 15.
Can I just intervene here? Could you ask people to talk into the microphone, please?
Yes, okay.
Just
Peter,
bring the
you need to
microphone
be a bit
near to
louder
your
for
mouth.
Lee.
So, I don't know if everybody else at the back can hear well enough. They can.
Yes,
I
they
can't.
can. Yes.
I'm deaf in one ear, so just humour me. It is a disability, by the way, and people seem to forget that deafness is a disability. It's not a joke.
No, that's right. So, thank you. So, Tom, do you want to introduce your report?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, very, very briefly. So this report proposes a new valuation framework where social value can be taken into account when the council is looking to rent out its property assets. I'd like to make 2 quick points of clarification on the report. Clearly, we've touched on the first one. It's around Appendix B. Appendix B is now a fictitious worked example that's obviously in public domain. And the second point I'd like to touch on is Section 3.6, which talks about the housing revenue account without mentioning it by name. But I would like to just make the additional point that clearly rents and funds raised in the HRA are reinvested in the housing estates. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, do you want to introduce what you're wanting us to do, why you're wanting to do us? Tell us about it. Is it lovely?
All of those things. Yes, it is lovely. Yes. Sorry, Gerald. The pre-conversation we had, which I think we agreed that the report pretty much speaks for itself. There are a number of recommendations in the body of the report that seek for members to approve this new valuation tool. It talks about the fact that service areas can look to support and promote social value in the context of their portfolio budgets. Section 4 of the report sets out in detail the framework by which this will work and references the examples that are attached as appendices. To be honest, without going through word for word, I think that is probably ample. If there's any questions I can answer, I will do.
That's very kind. Thank you. We have Councillor Joanette Smith here to deputation, and I think it's right to say that this piece of work started with Jeanette as Cabinet Member, so it's entirely right and appropriate that you're here to come and to speak on this as well, Jeanette. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gerald. First off, I'm going to say, read out what the principles of social value are. The principles of social value provide the basic building blocks for anyone who wants to make decisions that take this wider definition of value into account in order to increase equality, improve well-being and increase environmental sustainability. By applying the principles, it is possible to create a consistent and credible account for the value that is being created or destroyed. The outcomes and the measures and the values of the outcomes can remain specific to the context, activity and the stakeholders involved. And I am quite angry that this report is actually at Cabinet today, because it should be not have passed the tests of any report coming to Cabinet. And the reason is I've waited since October 2018 for this social value report. And what we have is a report that is all about PCC. Didn't even consult with the voluntary or the community sector. Didn't even sort of go through and say, what is it they need? All it is a rent subsidy model that's quickly been sort of cobbled together. And then the portfolio director will act as champion, an expert, and part of the evaluation, which then goes to the Section 151, and they will decide whether there's a rent subsidy or social value, and they will be the ones scoring the applicants, the impacts on the priorities and versus the beneficial impact, and not one mention of the voluntary sector. That's not what social value is. And then we come to the integrated impact assessment, which is why this report should have been withdrawn and before it came here. It's handwritten. In the bit about consultation being undertaken for this proposal, what are the outcomes of consultations, is a request from councillors. That's not what this impact assessment is about. It should be about the consultation and what consultation you've had, especially in this case with the voluntary and community sector. But it isn't. It's handwritten, I can hardly read it. This is a public document. Is this the standard we're now producing And why was it not stopped coming to Cabinet? Because this standard is not good enough. And I'm surprised that David didn't stop it, or legal didn't stop it, or anybody didn't stop it, because this is not the standard you should be having coming to Cabinet. This is more important than that. It's more about social value for the voluntary community sector. And back last year, Gerald, I'll remind you, you said you wanted to work in partnership with the voluntary and community sector, and this report doesn't do that. What it does is actually say, we're in charge as PCC, we're the local authority, so you do as I say. That's not working in partnership, and that's certainly not working in partnership with the Hive. Now, this social value question all started when I was a sort of portfolio holder, because PCC as a landlord, and we've just heard about rogue landlords, is a rogue landlord. Because if you look at somebody like Make, they pay £21,000 a year, and their building is substandard. It had holes in the wall, it had drain covers not suitable, no extractor fan, no heating, serious leaks in the roof, lintel damage, and needs seriously replacing, and it took me 12 months to get that done. Now, all you're doing is doing a piecemeal to a rent subsidy model that actually you probably won't even input anyway. So what I'm asking you to do is not look at the content about best value and commercial assets and changing it at the first legal opportunity. I'm not asking you to look at the rent reduction versus service delivery. I'm asking you to withdraw the paper, consult with the voluntary community sector, and bring it back with a more meaningful document that aids the sector, not PCC.
Okay, thank you. I don't recognise from what you said the things in the report, but Tom, is there anything from Jeanette's comments? Is there anything you'd like to pick up and see if we have an explanation for?
Specifically regarding the paper, or regarding the example that I potentially don't think should be discussed in this forum?
Either.
Okay. So, in relation to the paper and the model that's put forward, the model is specific around trying to look to align the council's objectives with those of businesses that are coming forward. It is predicated on looking at the rent of an asset. There is an underlying common sense approach that says when assets are let, they will be in a condition that is fit for purpose. Clearly, Councillor Smith has mentioned an asset where that isn't the case. The occupation by the tenant is of a property that isn't fit for purpose. But the proposal you have here would ensure that you've got standard terms for occupation and a balanced and fair level playing field for decisions that need to be made around occupation within the council's assets.
Okay, because my understanding of where we were going with this was that at the moment the rules that we have of the council says, and we have to do what we can do because we don't have control over everything, that we have to get, if we're looking at a building and we're renting it out, that we have to get as much money for it as we can because that money goes into social services and everything else. And that producing this plan gives us an ability to look not just at what people bring to the table in terms of finances to fund social service and everything else, but also to look to see if they're achieving other things that the council is trying to achieve, so our objectives, and therefore we can look to lower their rent because they're achieving something else that the council wants to do. Now that seems to me an admirable thing to do and a very sensible thing to do, because if they're achieving a corporate objective of the council, and we can actually get somebody else to do that for us and help in that's a sensible thing to look in terms of looking at whether we subsidise them to do that through a reduced rent. Now, it might be that this goes on to, there might be other things that we do, but this seems to me a good place to start. So I hear Councillor Jeanette Smith's concern, and it may be that what we need to do is to see how this works, and then talk with the voluntary sector to see if it does work, or if it doesn't work, or if there are ways to improve. But I think in terms of trying to make sure that we say something in principle, that we are prepared to look not just at financial monetary value, but at social value to achieving things the council is trying to do as well, and that is valuable, is the right way to go. Tom Wood, this is your portfolio.
Yeah, obviously I came to it to a different time to Jeanette, not being on the cabinet at the same time, but I do take a slightly different view. Certainly when this first came to my attention, it was very much the objective was, this is something the council is doing already, we're not doing it necessarily very well, or we're not doing it consistently, we're offering discounts to some organisations and not to others, not always in the appropriate way, and generally just kind of driven by the whim of whichever member was in charge at the time and what their interest was, and that wasn't right, and that we needed a process where we could, if we felt we could deliver social value through another organisation and they were unable to do it because the cost was prohibitive, that this would be the most efficient way of doing it, through offering a rent subsidy. That seems to me entirely sensible, and it's making something that we're doing that is good now but is inconsistent and not very well to do it better. Now, it looks to me like this paper does solve that problem. I don't disagree with all the other things Jeanette has said that are good things that we could achieve. I must admit, though, they weren't what I saw as the objective when I first came to this paper. I'd be interested in listening to more about that and how we could develop those ideas and bring them into something in the future. But I don't think that actually detracts from the good that this paper does do, which is improve a very real, solve a very real problem, and let us improve something for how we can support organisations in the city.
Okay. Matthew.
Thank you. I think this is a really good marker in the sand. As Jeanette knows, we had quite a lot of discussions about social value, not just here, but also at the Langston Harbour Board, especially around the social value of the Hayling Ferry. But when we came into administration 2 years ago, and we were having discussions about rents and everything, there was no any description of social value whatsoever in the way that people were being treated in terms of their rents. And there was it was all, as the leader said, it was all on how much money can we make for the council, and that was it effectively, and damn everything else. So I see this report as the first report which is headed social value. And this is a specific one, social value, a rent subsidy model. This is not, this is the social value report. This is the first marker for us as a council saying, this is how we see social value, and this is how we specifically see it in terms of how we treat rent with the people where we own the assets and they have social value. And indeed, it might be voluntary and community sector, and that's what it states in there, but actually it could well be other organisations as well. It's all about what those social value might be, and that might be something I think, certainly as Councillor Tom Wood has said, and the leader as well. Let's see how this goes, because I think there might be some amendments we need to make to this in the future in terms of more commercial organisations that, again, we might want in certain areas of the city in assets we own that have social value. But I certainly think that this is the first time I think we've ever had a paper in this council headed social value, and it will not be the last.
Okay.
So I really see this as a real line in the sand, a statement of intent, and I really back this paper.
Okay. Colleagues, I was wondering about whether we should add a third recommendation. Sorry, I'll try to make sure that I speak into the mic. To report back to Cabinet in 6 months' time, looking at the implementation of this policy and consult with the voluntary sector on how this is working. I wonder if that would help. Steve?
Well, in response to that, yes, but I don't see why not. But I was going to make a couple of other comments.
Yeah,
if that was okay. I just want to check with Peter first, though. We've had reference to a specific property as an example today from Councillor Smith. Are we able to add any further colour around that, or is that somebody else's business that we shouldn't really be discussing?
Probably somebody else's business you shouldn't be discussing.
Okay, then I won't make any comments on it. Talking in the abstract then, the council owns an awful lot of property in various degrees of good order or bad order, and it lets most of the bad order ones out to itself, I think is the primary point I want to make, which is why we took a strategic approach to landlords maintenance in this year's capital budget. We have some really poor quality buildings that we've underinvested in over the years that we use, and then we do have a range of other properties which are let out to a whole host of different people, from garages through to shops and storage units and all sorts of things, many of which are priced at their relative market value, as will all commercial property be, and part of that assessment in its value will be subject to the condition that it's in. So there's one community group that I worked with about a year ago who were moving out of their current storage space into it, and they needed somewhere else desperately. We looked around, we actually found a unit. They got a very small amount of discretion because even despite the fact they're a registered charity, the building was completely overgrown with greenery, hadn't been accessed properly for a long time, had a leak in the roof and goodness knows what else. It suited them just fine, and they were happy to take it on that basis, and they worked with the property team to make some improvements to it. So I don't think in itself the condition of the property is necessarily an issue. In an ideal world, the council would maintain all of its property to a very high standard. That's not the world we live in after 10 years of austerity. Where someone perhaps goes in and is able to sublet from another tenant who signed with us under a different set of circumstances, should that occur, this document will still not apply to that process, because that is not the way the law works. And that's unfortunate, but it is the case. There is more work to do. I actually think Councillor Smith's comments around what describes social value and how we look at it are a useful overarching way of us capturing that thought in our mind before those assessments take place. And the other comment I wanted to make was related to the relationship with the Hive. There will be a separate process around that which this can link into, and that will be coming forward in a report in the next few days.
Okay. Councillor Rob Wood, very quickly.
Yeah, I think there's just one thing in the background, 3.1 through to 3.5. Obviously, the idea of what is social value plus how you measure it and the tool. I think in one thing that rung true with me was obviously officers have put this down, and the value of social value, if you like, a organisation might put in, that might be something just to bear in mind when we do the review, because it is an umbrella term, as you say, and I just want to make sure the tool isn't just somebody who's thought of what social value is without actually getting some feedback from the very people who are implementing social value. That's a really important point.
Hence my amendment as well as in the paper. Okay, folks, with the amendment I proposed, colleagues are happy with that. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, now move on to the energy and water at home strategy. And Meredith, hello. Colleagues, do come and join us. Thank you very much indeed. If you like to just quite quickly tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why you're doing it, that would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Leader. The members will recall that November last year we brought the draft strategy to full Cabinet, and we were tasked then to consult with our key stakeholders in the area and also with the wider public. And what we've got in front of us is the amended and final version of the strategy, which takes on board the feedback that we had from, say, our key stakeholders and the wider public. The consultation started in December, and we engaged on a face-to-face basis with our key stakeholders. And the results of that consultation are included in Appendix 3. There's detailed information in terms of the questions that we were asking and the percentage of responses we had, and the free text answers that the stakeholders were giving us. In general, the summary feedback that we had from our key stakeholders was that strategy was good, that they supported us. It was good that the City Council was taking a lead in this area, and that they supported us in what we were trying to do, and obviously wanted to be part of the action plan and the communication marketing going forward. In terms of the wider public and other organisations, we consulted with them online, and we promoted that consultation through various social media outlets, promoted extensively. We had 273 responses, of which nearly 90% of those were from particular individuals rather than organisations. Again, the feedback, high percentage, well over 80%, very highly supportive of what we're trying to do. There were particular questions about certain renewable and energy efficient technologies that people asked us and wanted to be signposted to certain locations, etc. But the main results out of the consultation is that people were very supportive of what we were trying to do, and that they wanted to be included in the ongoing work around the development of the strategy and how the action plan and communications and marketing would develop.
Meredith, I'm looking for specifics. What are we going to do to how many houses and how are you going to achieve it?
Oh, well, I'll pass that over to my colleagues then.
I'm a bare little brain and I just like simple things.
Sure.
What are we doing?
Do you want to refer, Andrew?
Yeah. So, I mean, as we said at the last one of these, the strategy is obviously that overarching piece which pulls everything together. But within Appendix D of the report is a specific action plan around the types of work we're going to be undertaking, and a programme effectively as to when those works are going to be implemented and what resources are required to carry out those works. We don't necessarily break it down to numbers of individual households and things like that, but more just key themes of work and actions that are ongoing, or that will be ongoing. So some of those things are kind of front and centre of the work that we're already doing. So since we last presented this paper to Cabinet in November, we've actually been successful in winning additional funding for rollout into the very vulnerable households. We've launched a website. We've started doing certain things from the communication strategy, etc. But there are other things that we've highlighted as key points basically throughout the lifetime that this strategy covers the next 5 years.
So Andrew, tell me, how many homes are you going to insulate? How many boilers are you going to put in? If I was on the top bus of the Fratton Omnibus, how would I know you were doing this?
So effectively, every year we have what we're doing already, and that translates pretty well into the amount of demand that we're going to get over the next few years. So when it comes to something like boiler replacements, as you say, we do somewhere between 50 and 100 boiler replacements every year for free for vulnerable households. When it comes to first-time central heating, our estimate is that we'll do another 1,000 of those over the next couple of years. When it comes to insulation, it's a bit of a movable feast because we're expecting tomorrow in the budget that we might get several billions of pounds put towards this space, which would allow us to do more. But if we keep it at current rates, we do somewhere around 400 or 500 that we help to enable every year in terms of insulation, loft and cavity wall insulation.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful. Chris? No, wrong names. Yes. Anything to add in terms of anti-poverty strategy and things like that and how this fits in? Mark, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, crap with names.
Thank you.
Yes, a key part of this is around tackling poverty. It's going to be around maximising people's incomes and reducing the costs of energy. So that was something that came through in the consultation. A lot of people saw it solely as an energy strategy, and a lot of people looked at it from a climate change perspective solely. But one of the really crucial things for us is helping people in the city who are struggling to afford to keep their homes warm. That has a huge impact on households in the city, and those are the people that we need to target, and some of them may not be using enough energy at the moment, and we need to make sure that they can afford to use the energy that they need. So this fits very closely with all our work around that. So there's income maximisation work that we do through different services that we deliver in the city, and the aim of this really is to make sure that we can strengthen that we can bring it all together into a coherent offer, and that we can make it much more visible for people to access. We know there are still people that we aren't reaching. We know there are huge amounts of unclaimed benefits still that we need to make sure that we assist people to get, and this is another sort of route in, another access point where we can find those people and help them to get everything they're entitled to.
My understanding is that we have people who die early because they're not living in homes that are warm enough, and people on very low incomes, and it's that bleak, and that's why we need to be doing this work. Okay, thank you very much indeed for the introduction. And Darren.
Thank you. I can start by helping your brain, Gerald. There are some targets in here. The aim by April of next year is to get £2.5 million of external funding to help people who are living in fuel poverty in the city, to contact 2,000 people in the worst rated homes, the least energy efficient homes, by April next year, and to improve 500 of those homes, to enable to support 1,500 people to save at least £2 million of money they shouldn't be spending on energy in this city, but they do. And also to provide 1,500 water-saving measures, in other words, to help 1,500 households improve their water. We have faced a nitrates crisis, partly because different parts of government don't talk to each other, but we are talking to each other as an authority, and this is part of the creative work. And also to save 500 tonnes of carbon. Because one of the points I did agree with Cal earlier on is the need to ensure that all our properties are green. We had a Green Deal from the government at the start of this decade that failed, because nobody took it up, because it was all done wrong, and there weren't incentives for the lovely landlords that Cal loves so much, so they didn't do it. We've got to get it right, because we owe it to the people of this city. Too many people in our city have to choose between heating and eating, and that is wrong. And many of them, as Cal rightly pointed out earlier on, are the working poor, who live in private rented accommodation, the terraced houses in Southsea. They've been done up for years. We've got to try and make sure that happens. We've also got to try and make sure we balance that with our needs to meet the climate emergency that all councillors voted to put ourselves in. And that's going to be difficult, and that's going to mean some tough choices from time to time. And I know we've moved towards gas boilers initially, because that's frankly where the money is in terms of government funding, but we are going to have to make sure that happens. So it is a very ambitious programme, because the needs, both in terms of tackling the environment and poverty, are important. But we are, I have to say, Gerald, not bad at doing it, as we have yet again won the council's, the Energy Efficiency Council of the Year again, which I'm tempted to say says a lot about everyone else. But we've got to do a lot of things. We've also got to be tough on developers as well. And that's why the development at St James's Hospital, which is discounting renewable technologies, is not very good. And we've also got to make sure it's across the piece and be as integrated as this strategy is, which is one of the reasons why I'm delighted to propose it.
Okay, Matthew.
Thank you, Gerald. As the co-chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, I'd just like to feedback about Mark came to present to us there, and I think it was very well received by the boards. Of course, that's a board now that involves everyone from the police through to probation, through to children's services, education. So it covers a huge amount, as well as obviously adult social care and the local NHS. and I think they were all impressed by how thorough this strategy is, how it really is going to make a difference to people's health and well-being, because actually that's the most important thing at the end is the effect this is going to have on people, not just on their financial health, but also on their physical and mental health as well. So it's a really good strategy, and I think it's, to be honest, the fact we've got Mark here today as one of the presenters, as our tackling poverty coordinator at the council, that is really shows why this is so important, because if we don't get this right, if we have our residents who are literally going between eating and getting heating, that is going to cause massive issues for their health, massive issues for their well-being, and massive issues for how they live their lives. So I'd really like to thank the writers of the report and our strategy going forwards.
Okay. And Mark, my apologies, I got your name wrong. But thank you. I think this is a really important piece of work. And one of the bits I think is most important is the work with landlords, because previous schemes where landlords could see no benefit to themselves and therefore things didn't happen to the benefit of their tenants, I'm pleased to see we're going to try to work around that to try to make sure that the tenants do benefit, even if landlords don't think they should, because often people in private rented accommodation are the people who are really very, very much at the bottom of the pile. So thank you very much indeed for this, and I look forward to hearing more. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Everybody happy with this report? Good. Lovely. Okay. Mainstreaming proceeds of crime. So we wait for... Everybody's running out, they're not interested in crime. Thank you for coming, everybody. Okay, proceeds of crime, welcome, hello.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, members. Slight change of topic, but mainstreaming proceeds of crime. Although I will caveat that by saying, certainly with the first item and possibly the second item, there will be some joined up thinking that you might be able to pick out.
You couldn't speak closer to your mic, please,
Sorry,
because if that's all right.
So this document, is a proposal that really builds upon a current piece of work that Trading Standards has run for the last sort of 9 years, really, and very, very successfully. There's a paper that brought before the Cabinet Member for Community Safety not so long ago, setting out the successes that we've achieved over the last 9 years by using this piece of legislation. So that the Process of Crime Act is the piece of legislation I'm talking about, and within that piece of legislation there are a number of tools, a toolkit, if I can use that, an investigative toolkit that is accredited by the National Crime Agency, and it gives officers that have got that accreditation a number of powers, investigative powers, to do certain things. Now, Trading Standards and the Portsmouth City Council have a duty, a responsibility to enforce numerous pieces of legislation, more than I could probably number. I know certainly Trading Standards have about sort of 250 statutory duties that we have to enforce. But in terms of the work that we have on our ledger at any one time, it's usually a raft of rogue landlords, rogue traders, people peddling counterfeit goods or unsafe goods, those types of things. And over the last 9 years, we've got better and better at sort of tackling those people, tackling those businesses and those individuals, not just by using the traditional means of enforcing the legislation, but also going after the money that they're making out of doing the crime in the first place. So that's really what Proceeds of Crime is all about. It's about looking at the criminality and looking at what these people are obtaining as a result of committing that criminality and removing that benefit from them. The background legislation is set out in paragraphs 3 and 4 of this report. It is a very, very high-level overview of the legislation, but essentially it was brought in sort of March 2003. Local authorities didn't have those powers then. We were only given powers much later, November 2008. So, as Portsmouth City Council, we were quite on the forefront of that curve by managing to obtain powers back in sort of 2009, 2010, when I started training to be able to do this work. And we've developed from then. Since then, there's roughly about 25, 26 government agencies that have got powers to employ financial investigators and to deploy the legislation against their areas of regulation. And it's grown and grown and grown. The Home Office has always had the view that process of crime should be mainstreamed throughout policing and the wider law enforcement authorities, communities, if you want a better phrase. And so that is really where this piece of work, this proposal, comes in. We've had lots of success over the last 9 years within trading standards, but I see that there are a whole raft of other business areas within Portsmouth City Council whereby these powers, can be deployed as well. An overview: offenders who really breach regulation that we're responsible for enforcing, really, in my view, should expect to face the most appropriate sanctions available. And this piece of legislation has been shown, certainly over the last few years, to feature much more in regulatory crime than what I'd consider sort of the crimes, your frauds and your the piece of legislation that people would more associate with the police, HMRC and the like. It's featured much more in regulatory crime as well, so the sort of crime that the City Council is responsible for enforcing. Paragraph 4.4 of the report on page 3 at the top paragraph, sets out, and it's a non-exhaustive list, but it sets out a few of the areas where I feel this piece of legislation, the powers that are contained within it, could certainly benefit the business areas that are charged with enforcing and the City Council as a whole. So we mentioned rogue landlords earlier. I mean, there's a whole raft of case law around Process of Crime Act being applied to the Housing Act and the departments within local authorities that are charged with enforcing rogue landlords. Chronic fly tippers. There's a whole. I know from personal experience there are currently a number of cases going through the courts where Portsmouth City Council are prosecuting chronic fly tippers. We should be going after the fruits of their ill-gone games as well. Parking fraud, food standards. The list goes on. Adult social care dishonesties. We have a whole. It's almost endemic, the amount of adult social care fraud that is most likely going on because of direct payment fraud, people using the monies they're getting for adult social care inappropriately, but other areas as well: illegal subletting and planning infringement. So I've done some work for other local authorities on planning enforcement. POCA is a well-established landscape for that those areas as well. So what I believe we need to do is essentially set out in paragraph 8, which sets out a framework for mainstreaming the processes, the guidance, the templates, the training and the expertise and skill sets that we currently have within regulatory services out into other areas of the council, where so that when there is an issue with enforcement, so if it's a planning enforcement breach, the planning team should be coming to me or coming to regulatory services and saying, is this a valid case for using the Process of Crime Act? It shouldn't be that people who break certain laws, there shouldn't be inconsistencies. Yeah. We should have consistency across the board when it comes to enforcement in Portsmouth City Council, and at the moment I don't think there is. I think this will go some way to doing that. So in addition to the framework, we're investing in more skills and expertise. So we're investing in a legal advocate, which will give us further checks and balances and more financial investigators like myself. It doesn't come without its risks. So the risks, as with any enforcement, any criminal enforcement in the courts, there is always legal, reputational and financial risks. We haven't lost to date. Our track record is very, very good. So I am confident that we can go out into areas new areas like planning, like housing and the like that I've referenced in the report. So on that basis, I would ask the Cabinet to recommend the recommendations in paragraph 2.
Okay, that's very kind. Thank you. Lee, this is your portfolio.
Well, it's all of our portfolio. Crime and scammers, rogue landlords, the sorts of things that Carol Corker was talking about earlier on. It shows how increasingly our City Council, our officers, work across the services within the Council, and of course within and across the services outside, people like Federation Against Copyright Theft, and with the police and so on. What this report says, and I'm sure the Cabinet's going to agree it, what this report says is that you are a scammer in our city if you come here to rip off old ladies, or if you go around fly tipping, if you behave in a fraudulent way within social services, you are a rogue landlord and you're subletting, you're doing these things which are criminal, all described by Ed, and much more besides. This Liberal Democrat administration is going to be tough on you. We are going to come after you, and we're going to use all the powers available to the local authority, as described by Ed, to take away your property, to take away your cars, to take away your cash. And that is what this report will do. So I hope very much indeed that you will agree with the report, and that we will seek to train up more accredited financial investigators across all the services described by Ed. I would like to ask if the Cabinet would accept one more further recommendation, that the officers report back to the community safety portfolio the progress with this report at regular intervals, so that I can keep an eye on what is going on, how many new people have been trained up, and that. I mean, it's a very good report. We've heard from Ed how he's working with legal services. They haven't had a case go wrong yet. And they've got a very good track record. We've got very competent officers, have skilled themselves up very well. The only thing I would like to point out, and it's something I go on about from time to time, what the work they're doing here, I don't believe it's a statutory service, so it will finance itself. It will make this kind of work sustainable. The one thing that worries me, and I've said it over and over again, is if this service, which Mr. Lee runs and Ed is within, has to go out and employ 6, 7, 8 new port staff to look after the trading standards and health issues around the port, that's got to come out of that budget. So that is a risk to us dealing with moving forward in this way. So if we do this, we're giving them every opportunity to go out and get that criminal money, and you'll see some of it's only a portion. It's only a portion of what they get. The government takes quite a bit, I believe, Ed. So we get a portion of it. But it's a really good report. We're going to come after chronic fly tippers. We're going to go after people who peddle counterfeit goods and also breach planning issues in a criminal way, and so on, as described by Ed. So I hope you'll all agree it's a darn good report, and we should congratulate Mr. Lee and his team for everything that they do for us in this city, and the way that they're going to work across the services to create more accredited financial investigators.
Thank you. Mr. Pitt.
Thank you very much, Ed, for presenting today, and thank you to Richard as well, and thank you for all the ongoing work you've been doing. And again, thank you to my colleague Lee Hunt for ensuring that this came to Cabinet. Mainstreaming is the important word in all of this. There's been great work going on, but it's been doing it in quite a narrow field, and that's partly because there was no reserve in place to mitigate should we lose a case. And you cannot be so risk averse that you say we will never plan for ever losing, because that stops us going after some really dodgy people who do some really dodgy things to some of the most vulnerable people in this city. And some of them are landlords. Some of them exploit every single bit of planning regulation that they can, and they know that we are tight on resources to go round and do the enforcement to catch them. We will catch one of you, and we will prosecute you, and that rent that you've taken fraudulently from your tenants and expose them to risk living in your property while you line your pockets, one of you is going to get caught, and I will be in court to see you convicted. Thank you.
Lynn.
Can I just ask how much money is normally sort of produced from these processes of crime? And is there any, I appreciate that a lot of it is put back into keeping the service going, because obviously the more people you have, the more criminals you can get. But is there any left over to put into such things as working with young offenders or potential young offenders to head them off at the pass kind of thing?
That's a really good question, actually. It's long been my ambition, really, to build this work to a sort of a critical mass where we can offer projects to, say, for Portsmouth Partnership, that type of thing, really. Initially, all the money has been ploughed back into supporting service. As Councillor Hunt mentioned, of a confiscation order we might obtain, we only get 37.5% of that back. So the remaining money goes either to central government or to the enforcing courts to make sure the actual order is enforced. So we have been very successful with actually a very small amount of resource over the last 9 years. There's only bits of me, really. Now we've got bits of me, a fully fledged officer, and a couple of other people undergoing training as well. So I am very ambitious that in the future we'll be back before a committee or of some sort, but with some money to offer for a project.
Thank you. Colleagues, with Lee's amendment of the report back, colleagues happy with this? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Ed. Moving on to administration fees for appointee services. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Leader.
Richard, welcome. Do you want to quickly run us through what's going on?
I will try and keep this brief for you.
Then you won't be following us, but thank you.
The purpose of this report is to seek approval for the introduction of administration fees from Monday the 6th of July 2020 for clients in receipt of appointeeship services provided by the City Council. The rationale for the proposed introduction of these fees is to ensure that the service will be available to support future vulnerable adults requiring our services. Without introducing the proposed charges, there is a risk that the service would not be able to continue to support the growing number of clients. The recommendations within the report have been driven by a number of key principles. Firstly, to support the adult social care strategy, to enable people to live independently and remain within their communities, to recognise that appointeeship clients will be in receipt of state benefits and little other income, therefore we have sought to keep the fees as low as possible, and to ensure that the income generated by these proposals will enable the service to continue to support those vulnerable clients who require our services. The report provides further detailed information on the role and function of the appointeeship services, the proposed operating model and the charging arrangements. The report also contains benchmarking information for your information on the charging arrangements with other local authorities, as well as those of other organisations providing appointeeship services. Section 7 of the report provides details of the proposed community engagement process that will be undertaken prior to the introduction of these charges in July, if the report is approved today. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, Matthew.
Thank you, Gerald. And thank you, Richard. Just on the situation compared to independent private independent organisations, can you just give an idea of what our proposed fees are and how they compare to those outside organisations?
Okay, if I could draw your attention to page 7, it's paragraph 5.16. There's a table there from some of the organisations that we've identified in the research and preparing this report. And for example, you can see the top provider there for clients in the community. The basic package equates to £15.34 per week, and we're proposing £10 a week. The second one on that list the cost per week for clients in the community equates to around £14.96 per week, again £10. And similarly, there's that sort of differential for the clients in residential accommodation.
Thanks, Richard. And can you just before I make my comments, can you just clarify, is this full cost recovery? Is this the full cost of the service that is proposed to be charged?
No, it's not full cost recovery. Set out in paragraph 5.1, it shows the cost that if we were going full cost recovery we would be introducing, and that for community-based clients would be around in excess of £21 per week. So we're proposing £10 per week.
Thank you, Richard. I'd just like to, it's one of those tricky ones with this, we're bringing these kind of fees, because you don't really want to. But we're in this situation whereby in the last 9 years we've gone from 90 clients who were supported with this with administration fees to 260, so a huge increase, and we are going to have more in the future because we're having more people living in the community, and it's not a statutory service. My real concern was that if we don't introduce these fees, then we will have no option to help more people, and that we would end up having our around 260 would be the very maximum we could do. So for me, it's a case of, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to do this because we would be able to fund this out of a proper funding for adult social care. But as we don't get proper funding for adult social care from government, then we are stuck with having to try and make it wash its own face. So I think by having fees that are considerably cheaper than the alternatives, which also mean that this is a sustainable service, which is going to enable anyone who needs this service to be able to access it, at the same time as if anyone is unable to afford the fees, they won't have to pay them. I think this is the way forward, and I'm pleased to propose the recommendations. Colleagues.
Colleagues, are you happy with this?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Great. Kelly, hello, welcome. Greening Portsmouth strategy. Do you want to leap in?
Yep, very brief introduction to this. So this is a single framework that we're bringing together to try and increase the amount of greenery, but also to balance that greenery in the city to make sure that we're maximising the impacts that that has. Those benefits include obviously advantages for mental and physical well-being in the city, air quality and also carbon capture. We've structured the framework into 4 what we're calling branches for the strategy, which is around how we're going to green the space which we are responsible for, how we're going to encourage people to actually green their own private land, a wider public engagement programme, and also how we're going to approach those policy levers that we have in place, for example, looking at the local plan in the future. In terms of actions, that will include a significant planting programme for PCC, and we're currently looking at what that would look like, and we'll bring that forward for further consideration. In terms of numbers, Councillor Vernon-Jackson, over the lifetime of this strategy, we're looking at trying to increase the trees in the city by around 1,200 a year. For Portsmouth City Council's own actions, it's probably worth thinking about that. For the first 1,000 days of this, we'd look to have 1,000 trees. But it's also worth emphasising that we're not talking just about trees. This is the whole range of greenery for the city, so including other planting as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I can't help but notice more trees all over the place. We're in Milton Park, on South Sea Common, Bangersborough, and then I think somewhere just off Fawcett Road, but all over the place I'm finding new trees. My question is, Colas work on behalf of the council, and we introduced a new programme for them for when they were going to take trees out on the highway, for them to be able to explain to local people what they're doing and how they're going to replace them. How's that working, do you know, Kelly?
So colleagues in Colas have been party to drawing this up and have actually been very positive and enthusiastic in embracing this. I think it's helpful for them to have that clarity of approach as well, and have certainly signed up to all of those things that have been put in the Tree Charter document, which includes that communication programme.
Okay. Mr Ashmore.
Hello. Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to say, it's a very hopeful document, this one. It's one of quite a number we've had come to Cabinet, about improving the environment around us, or, to do things like air quality. And, this reaches across the whole city here, which helps, obviously, in the climate crisis we find ourselves in. There's loads of good things in it. We've worked with, I remember me and Councillor Pitt there, we met up with Portsmouth Friends of the Earth, so we've gone through things, it's not just what councillors think are best or what officers think are best. This is actually going to people and speaking to, Friends of the Earth, Wild of Portsmouth, getting people involved in this one, and it's a really strong document. You said you've seen more trees go up. I've had, seen more trees go up in my area in Fratton, so that's a good thing. There's other thing. It's not just about trees, as Kelly said. It's about other things we can do, wildflowers, hedges, putting in living walls, things like that. Just increasing the greenery. That helps with the air quality. There's knock-on effects with all kinds of things, from not people with respiratory illnesses to even mental health and well-being as well, being in areas where there's more greenery. I think this is a great. This is a great report. It's, as I said, it's on the back of other reports, and I think it complements well the fact that we've had the greenest budget ever at full council that we passed. So I think this is really encouraging going forward, and I'm really happy to recommend this. And thank you, officers, for their work on this.
Okay, colleagues, I have Steve Pitt, Lynn Stagg, Rob Wood, Susie Horton, Darren Sanders, and Lee Hunt. So I think we're going for bingo here. Steve.
Well, I was actually trying to draw your attention to the number of other people signalling, but I will take the opportunity to jump in at this point. It's just really a thank you to Kelly and Tristan Thorne for the work that they've done on pulling this together. Sometimes there's accusations that bits of the council don't talk to each other, or indeed that politicians don't talk to each other. This is a clear example that we do, because the teams in my portfolio in culture and leisure, the parks team, have worked seamlessly with housing and with the environment teams on this to get all this information into one place and create a proper strategic document that's overarching, that sits across every activity the council does to ensure that we are considering greening at every single stage. The local plan being developed will also feed into that, and a particular thank you to the team from Friends of the Earth who came in and met with us more than once and interrogated us and asked us all the right questions to make sure that we were doing this right, and their feedback's been invaluable in developing this, and their ongoing support is going to be absolutely crucial in making sure that the council's doing all it can, but it's also got great groups like Friends of the Earth advocating to the wider community about getting this city greened.
Okay, Lynn.
Thank you. I am so pleased to hear your change of heart, Gerald. It has delighted me, because 10 years ago I remember having constant battles with you where you wanted to take out a redundant tree pits and instead convert them into parking spaces, and you were very adamant that was not. So I'm absolutely delighted, and one of the things that I'm pleased about with this as well, obviously the fact we're planting trees, but I believe you're involving schools, because it's expensive. It's 50,000 trees, semi-mature trees, are going to cost an arm and a leg and more. And I mean, I've done some at Baffin's Pond. We just got 30 saplings and had kids there, and they've planted them up, and they've got their names on the pots, and I've checked them on Saturday, and they're doing really well. So they're going to come back next autumn and plant them, and they will have that involvement. That's their tree. They will watch it, and I think, and there's nothing better than pester power from kids, because they influence their parents as well. So I'm pleased about that. And the other thing that I don't think, I may have missed it, is mentioned in here, that the other thing the trees do, of course, is taking water and cut down on the amount of flooding. Yeah. So the more trees you have, the more water is taken in from the ground. One area that does worry me, and that is that new developments, they cut down trees left, right and centre and claim that they're diseased, and nine times out of 10 they're perfectly okay, particularly trees with TPOs on them. Can planning please have a stronger arm over this, because to see mature trees, St James's site is a good example. They've cut down magnificent trees which are perfectly healthy. So, but otherwise, great report. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a request I keep putting in for more trees at Ashby Place car park because local residents want them and they haven't happened. Lynn, can I leave that with you? Because it's months late.
You have never mentioned it to me before, but I will now take that up.
Thank
But
you.
with your change of heart, yes, I'm delighted to go that way.
Okay.
It's Kelly that we need to tell to make sure that she's communicating.
Kelly, it's a TNT thing. I keep feeding it in, but with little effect. Okay. Rob.
Kelly, I'm going to come at this a slightly different view about the fact that tree strategy, and you talk about in your section 4 about having a charter, and you talk about consultation with the public and making sure they go. Trees are a very emotive situation. I've been on both sides of the fence, and I think it's very important because I've had to deal in the ward on both sides. That's both saving trees and asking for trees to remove. And I think it's really important that if we go for a greening strategy in the city, we don't lose sight of that this charter must be appropriate to people out there and needs to give a level playing field for everybody, rather than my colleagues are jumping on and saying plant trees, but it's perfectly correct to say where appropriate. Okay, and there must be a way of dealing with that in the charter, because clearly tightening things up where it's appropriate is good. Okay, making sure that we remember we are people and we may love trees, but one or the other may have to give from time to time. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Susie.
Just to extend that, what Rob said is we've got a lot of trees in our ward which are fruiting trees, which then end up being really dangerous when all the fruit falls on the pavement, even though they look nice. So I take on board that point. Just a couple of things really. Well, on Gerald's point about noticing, I actually think, although I was a little bit facetious in the sense of we know psychologically that when your attention is drawn to something you notice it more, in actual fact I think that's a really good thing, because actually part of this is about the narrative and about about getting people to filter what they see as well. And actually we do have more, I've noticed more green spaces since we've been talking about this, so that's a positive thing. Second thing, Lynn actually basically covered it. I know I'm going to be a broken record on this, but actually out of all of the issues that I think we deal with, climate change and the environment are something that young people can lead on, not just be tokenistically included, and I just will emphasise that again, but Kelly's heard me say that before. And last but not least, I just wanted to do a hat tip to Kelly's outfit today, which is completely wonderful.
Thank you. Darren? Should we make comments on Darren's out? No.
And I can't make comments on yours either,
No,
so I won't. I think one of the interesting things about today is I don't think anybody can leave here without thinking this administration is slightly as ambitious for our city. Whether it's on environmental issues, whether it's on tackling the private sector, whether it's on tackling energy efficiency, and we haven't even got to transport yet, then I think this is an administration which is working with people across the city to tackle the long-term issues that politicians in the city have spent years running away from. And I'm delighted that we're able to do that, in not just in difficult ways as with earlier, but also in nice ways like this. And one of my tasks after this, because I've been told to, is to email this strategy to the Tree Council, who are very, very, very keen to talk to this council about the work that can be done. And the work is done everywhere, and Steve is absolutely right. It's shocking when you talk to each other, because actually things get done. So on the Eastern Road, in the council blocks on the Eastern Road, I agreed that we should have new trees, and we should have new shrubs as well. But that wasn't good enough, because we know the Eastern Road is one of the main transport corridors in the city, and that's why, working with colleagues in Culture and City Development, we're able to expand it onto Milton Common and onto the tough bits as well. And that's good when you're ambitious and you want to tackle the long-term problems. I would also agree that Lynn's point as well around encouraging local people, because we can't do this ourselves. I was delighted to be on a housing estate in Buckland on Sunday, where I saw lots of people plant lots of trees, which is great, including many local residents who feel keen and encouraged and enthusiastic to help make this city greener and more sustainable. And I think part of our strategy also has to be to make sure that we can encourage local groups and local communities. I know in my own ward, in Lynn and my ward, the Love Baffins group is very keen to help green Tangier Road, which I think Lynn is deputed to go down and tell them what to do, and not least the shops, to make sure that they're actually tell them what to do. which we'll look forward to, because that's a shopping parade where it's very difficult to plant street trees. I want to try and make sure it's fine. I would also raise one very small point which will be very important going forwards in the strategy before I email it to the Tree Council, which is I'm delighted to see that developments that will mean a net loss of green space will be resisted. This is a tougher version of what is currently in our local plan. I think it's essential for our city to make sure people live in communities as well as providing the homes that Portsmouth people can afford. And as someone who had to live through the loss of green space at Moneyfields Football Club, I'm delighted to see that toughening up there, because we have to send out the right messages, not just to our young, but to everyone, that we take greening our city seriously. Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you. Finally, Lee.
Well, you know, this is a darn good council. And it's true. I mean, this council, I saw Mark Sage yesterday. He's here today, and he was doing a presentation over fuel poverty. This city council has been recognised as, was an award winner over reducing fuel poverty here, and that is part of the greening strategy too. And then again, we see last year that the city council, and thanks to the officers and the leadership here, became crowned South East Regional champions for renewable energies, green energies. Now, this doesn't happen by chance. This happens because a bunch of good officers with good leadership have come up with these cross-service working with Darren and the Housing Revenue Account, providing the cash to plant these new trees, hundreds of them. You've only got to go along some of the main street, just see all these new trees appearing. So it's absolutely brilliant. We're all working very hard indeed to achieve this greening strategy, and thank Kelly for it. I want to touch on a couple of not minor issues. The trouble is too, when you see all these new trees going in, the truth is so many of them, lots of them, I don't know if you've seen it, are being destroyed. So as soon as they go in, and you can't go in and plant great big mature trees because they're just too expensive to do. I think we've got to work out a way of protecting these trees when they go in. They're going to need some form of protection. There's absolutely no point putting in 1,000 trees and then having 500 of them destroyed. It's no point, is there? It's a complete waste of money and time. There's some of that's down to education. There are some ways where you get young people through the schools education program with Susie, where they respect the trees that they're growing on in the schools. That was a very good initiative. And you know, sometimes we talk about it amongst ourselves, but sometimes these initiatives don't come out into the public arena. We know we're doing them, and so when we get to meetings like this, is a real opportunity for us to give ourselves all a pat on the back, and I think we really should, because so much is being done from the port through to schools, through to solar energy, through to the electrical charging points, to the trees being planted, to new hedging. So I'm going, this is all joined up. And it's what we've been looking for. I remember David, when he first came here many years back, he said we've got to reduce the silos, the way we do silo working. It was silo working back there, and it's very different now. And some of that, ironically, has been brought about by austerity. I'm not saying austerity is a good thing, but it's forced us to look at ways that we do our services. I think we would have got there anyway because we want to do better. But so it's marvellous. Just to touch on the tree pits, if I may, slightly, not all tree pits work. With the best will in the world, we keep planting very good, healthy trees into some of the tree pits, and let's face it, they're in the middle of the road where diesel and where fuel, oil goes into the tree pit, it gets down into their roots. Sometimes there are gas leaks that come up through the ground and poison the roots of the tree, which they do. Campbell Road is a classic, and they spoil the life of the tree and they die. Some tree pits simply don't work, and trees get diseased too quickly. So some of those tree pits aren't any good. Quite how we resolve that yet, I don't know, because I want more and more and more and more trees. The more trees, the more healthy trees, the more we have a better city, the more we have a healthy city, the more better our air is. I could go on and on and on, but I think they don't want me to anymore. but everybody's doing a darn good job. It's a darn good council, and a lot of other councils are looking at the work that is done here. So I would just like to congratulate all of my colleagues for their joined up working, and I would like to thank all the officers for their working with us and understanding where we want to go. So thank you all very much indeed.
Okay, folks, are you happy with the report? I think everybody has said so. Yes, thank you.
I had to get off my chest.
I'm glad to hear it. Can we see if we can run through some of the rest fairly quickly? Item 9, forward plan and mission. Agreed. Annual capital strategy. Jules, anything you need to add?
Nothing to add, Leader, but just in a very brief summary, the capital strategy in its current form was approved originally in March 2019. This is an update to that strategy. The strategy's in two parts. The first part sets out the principles by which the Council's future capital expenditure programmes that are approved by City Council each year will be formulated, with Appendix 1, Part 1 setting out the key short, medium and long-term capital investment needs of the Council. And then Part 2 considers the impact of both the approved and potential future capital expenditure plans on the borrowing investment activities of the Council, including the recommended debt repayment policy relating to the amounts that the Council has borrowed. And it also, I think importantly, provides a set of indicators to enable the Council to monitor its exposure arising from those borrowings and investment decisions. And those indicators are included at Part 2, Appendix 2. And members are asked to approve the recommendations contained at Appendix 3.
Okay, I just want to add one recommendation. I think we probably need to have some level of oversight, probably from the leader and deputy leader of the capital programme and changes and amendments to it over the year. So I think it would be sensible if we get together monthly just to see what changes there are so that we know that.
Okay.
Colleagues, you happy with that? Yeah. Lovely. Thank you. Let's move on to Treasury Management Policy.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just a really brief summary of this strategy for you. Members are asked to approve the Treasury Management Policy for 2021, which is designed to ensure that the Council's cash flows are adequately planned and managed to ensure that cash is available when it is needed. The most significant policy amendments to bring to your attention are that the investments of surplus cash through the Treasury Management Policy will avoid fossil fuel extraction unless they are making a substantial investment in renewable energy technologies. The Treasury Management Strategy will also consider environmental and social governance elements of credit ratings prior to deciding where it places its surplus cash investments, but a rider on that is that subject to always ensuring there is sufficient liquidity available to the Council and the return on risk is not compromised. There is also, we're seeking a change to the current policy which would enable lending to Hampshire Community Bank, which will be secured on loans with then Hampshire Community Bank indeed then makes itself to small and medium-term enterprises, but limiting that only to the highest credit quality, those with the highest credit quality rating, but these may not be secured on their tangible assets. Because of that change, we're also recommending that as a consequence of that change to the policy, we would like to change the maximum duration that we would lend to Hampshire Community Bank under the Treasury Management Policy to reduce that from 10 years to 5 years. And again, members are asked to approve the recommendations contained in the report.
Okay. In terms of Hampshire Community Bank, I think I would want every decision to lend to any money to Hampshire Community Bank to come back for a full cabinet decision and not for it to rest with officers. I am very uncertain about lending to Hampshire Community Bank, and I think we need to have considerable oversight of that. Can I ask Jules, in terms of if we decided to invest in as the income generation strategy says, to invest in a regeneration scheme, how would that be covered with this?
Treasury management deals purely with surplus cash on the council, and this tends to be
Okay.
short-term investments, normally of a duration of less than 12 months. If you wanted to make an investment that would lead to long-term capital regeneration, that would come forward through the capital programme.
Okay, all right, thank you. Rob?
Yeah, very quickly, just in servicing debt that you may lend out, etc., because obviously there's currently, worries about that particular one. Have you factored that in? Is there anything that you would say that we need to be worried about in terms of people may get pressure from elsewhere and therefore they'll tighten up in their response to us, etc.?
We will only lend to organisations in accordance with the Treasury management strategy, and those who we lend to and the amounts we lend to are laid out in the appendices that are there with you. We also keep under review on a daily basis the credit ratings of the institutions that we will lend to, and also the counterparty insurance risk ratings that they receive. And as I say, they're updated daily, so we're monitoring situations before we lend to any organisation our surplus cash.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, you happy with this? Okay, thank you. Item 12, revenue budget monitoring. Oh, no, yes, that's right. For quarter 3, Julian, anything to add to the report?
Sorry, Chair. No, just a really brief update, if I may. This is the third quarter monitoring report for 2019. In which contained in that report are a number of over and under spendings which are outlined. Just to draw to your attention that after transfers from portfolio specific reserves, a total net underspend of £625,000 is being forecast compared to the revised budget. And in accordance with recommendations that were approved by Council in February, any underspending that actually arises at the end of the year will be transferred to make available for future capital resources.
Okay. Colleagues, everybody happy with that? Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the LTP. Felicity, hello. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Anything to add to the report?
Can I give a brief overview?
Yeah.
So the report seeks approval for the draft vision. Felicity, Hayley.
I call everybody Albert, including my sisters, on the basis that I can't get anybody's name wrong.
So the report seeks approval of the draft vision and objectives for the Portsmouth Local Transport Plan 4 and outlines the direction that the strategy will take. The LTP is a statutory requirement of all local transport authorities, and it sets out the vision, ambition and strategic direction of transport in the city. The significant changes from central government with regard to transport and the wider policy means that an updated longer-term integrated transport strategy is required, governing the period from 2020 to 2036, and it will address some of the key transport challenges around climate change emergency, air quality and the ministerial directions across the city, delivering future growth and the changes in travel patterns that have occurred over recent years. Therefore, the proposed new vision for the transport plan that we're putting forward in the draft strategy for consultation will be by 2036, Portsmouth will have a people-centred travel network prioritising inclusive, active and sustainable connectivity that creates a safer, healthier and more prosperous city. Underlying that vision, there will be 4 strategic objectives focused around delivering cleaner air, prioritising walking and cycling, transforming public transport and supporting business and protecting our assets. So that's particularly around network management and highway maintenance. So therefore the recommendations today to Cabinet are to approve the draft vision and policy objectives of the Local Transport Plan 4, agree the continued development of the draft strategy in accordance with the vision and policy objectives, and finally to bring back the strategy to full Cabinet, to Cabinet and full Council for approval to consult in June. Thank you.
Okay. Lynn.
First of all, can I say give my thanks to the officers who've worked incredibly hard on this and under quite extreme circumstances as well, because there have been several major bids for funding which have taken up huge amounts of time and huge amounts of people's experience. For example, the Transforming Cities Fund, which is a bid for £220 million, which is a lot of money. Future Mobility Zones, LC WIP, that's the Local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Electric vehicle charging points and funding for things like bike hangers, etc. So there's a lot of external things going on. Shortage of officers, experienced officers in some areas of the department, and several officers have had to move up to take responsibility. I mean, Pam, who was the assistant director, had to move up to take over the Transforming Cities Fund bit. Felicity moved into her place, and then Hayley moved into her place, and so on. So taking on a lot of responsibility at short notice with huge demands. So amazing amount of success, and thanks to you. The Portsmouth has got, I want to get this message across, right across the city, because we're not getting the message across to most people. Transport in Portsmouth has got several major problems. One is the fact that we're an island and we've only got 3 roads going on and off. But we have about 43,000 vehicles a day coming into the city every day. And then with cars registered, ownership registered to houses, works out at about 1.6 cars per household, and more than the space for parking, etc. So 2 areas of major congestion, and congestion leads to air pollution, but also a loss of money through delay. Now, I was amazed to find out that in 2018, for the United Kingdom, this is not just Portsmouth, I hasten to add, there was a loss of £7.9 billion just through delay on roads. And that works out at 178 hours on average per driver, lost per year, and a cost to each driver on average of £1,300. So it's not just about air pollution, it is about money coming into the city and businesses surviving and growing. And the third area is that we have not got a good enough public transport system, not as good as we could have. So these need to be addressed, and to do that we need to get people to change the way they travel and less dependence on the car. And this is what the integrated transport strategy is all about. And that fantastic, I know it doesn't show up terribly well in here, but that one there, which is lovely on May 3 sheet, yes, in blue, is just magnificent. And it's a work of art, but it's also a work of great genius to actually, it's absolutely superb. So we have to in order to change this, we've got to improve the provision for alternative, sustainable ways of travel. For example, improving public transport, working with the bus companies, the road companies, etc. Improving walking and cycling provision. To improve connectivity, to be able to get from A to B in different modes of transport easily, to get from A to B on buses using the one ticket, an integrated ticketing system, for example, and that sort of work going on. But also to have increased safety for people, whether they're walking or whether they're cycling. And I think we need to point out that the integrated transport strategy is aspirational. That doesn't mean to say we're not going to get there, but so much of it depends on getting external funding. We haven't got enough money for all of it. So we've got to do really well on the things we're doing now in order to attract the attention of the Department for Transport, etc., to say we are brilliant at addressing the problems, and then we can get more funding in, and then we can get what we've got written out in that strategy. But also we need to remember that it is dynamic. This is not something that is static. This is not going to be the same in 16 years' time, because various things will have come in, hopefully, like different types of technology. So it will be a movable feast kind of thing. So this is what we're aiming for now, but that will probably change next year with some additions, changes, etc. To it. And so I recommend this. I think it's a superb piece of work, and yes, totally recommended. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matthew?
Thank you. I'm just going to read the vision out, because I think this is the real key. By 2036, Portsmouth will have a people-centred travel network prioritising inclusive, active and sustainable connectivity to create a safer, healthier and more prosperous city. That is what we are all working towards. And again, this is something that works right across the council and outside the council. It includes local people, it includes local businesses, it includes local organisations, voluntary community sector, NHS, the list goes on. it's a really important document, this, and I'm really pleased to see it here. As Lynn has already mentioned, Appendix A with the draft transport strategy really puts into context how we want to do things and when. But also, there's some things that appear in year 16, encouraging behaviour change, for example, which of course will be going on throughout those 16 years, and will hopefully have that culmination in 16 years' time. And there's other things like clutter-free streets, car-free developments that hopefully will not take anywhere near 16 years to get there. Obviously, as from a personal point of view, being a bit of cyclist around the city, anything to do with walking, cycling is absolutely fantastic. And one of the things to really pull out of here is that we don't just have a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which of course is coming, I think, to Lynn's meeting later this month, which is only the first, because by the time of 2036 we will have local cycling and walking infrastructure plan 3. So that will be something that we will be working on, exactly what Lynn says about how we move and make sure that we move with the times and change things. Something I just really want to pick out with my portfolio hat on is the work for workplace travel planning. That is something that I know the Director of Public Health, Helen Atkinson, is very keen on addressing, especially to do with our health and care sector. The biggest contributor for workplace carbon emissions in the whole country is the NHS and the care sector. Because the way it's worked in the past, and because of the nature of the thing, people going around seeing people in their homes, but also how can the NHS, being this massive employer, work better to do things. I know at not just the Portsmouth level, but at Hampshire and Isle of Wight level, and at a national level, they're really looking at working with that. And I know Lynn is going to have a meeting with Solent NHS to be looking at how they can improve walking and cycling of their staff members to St Mary's Hospital and around the city and beyond, but also how they can better promote active travel and ways that they can interact with their patients so that they can see them in their homes rather than so that's one person travelling rather than getting them in. And there's much work to be done in terms of how the hospitals interact, both our hospital here in Portsmouth and of course hospitals around the area, whereby our people from Portsmouth at the moment, they all have to go up to Southampton or elsewhere, rather than saying one person makes a trip here and they can see everywhere at the same time. So this is something that we are doing as a council, but it is going to have ripples and effects across the whole of the city in the way that if we get everyone on board with this, that vision is going to happen. And that's the way we do it. So it's really important we get our residents on board, our businesses and other organisations on board, and our visitors on board as well, because we really want them to make the most of the city and enjoy the city as good as it can be. So I'm thrilled with this strategy, and I really hope we can adopt this and really make a difference to the city.
Colleagues, thank you much indeed. I think we're slightly over time in terms of our rent of this room. So colleagues, are you happy with the LTP programme? Thank you very much indeed. Finally, can I put on record my thanks to Rob? This is his last cabinet meeting. So thank you, Rob, for all your work, but we should officially note it. So thank you very much indeed. And that's the end of the meeting.